Hello, my friend, and welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Mashbitz, and this is a solo episode of the podcast, so let's get right into it. It's been a little over 6 months since October 7th, 2023, and the blizzard of moral confusion about the atrocities committed on that day and about Israel's response to them remains something to behold. This is my 5th episode on this topic. If you've listened to any of those, you probably understand what I think, but I'll make a few very condensed points here, which might help explain why I think Israel absolutely has to win this war, and that any call for a ceasefire, especially one that doesn't first demand the return of the hostages, is wrong. Anyone who thinks that we can compromise with jihadists either doesn't understand jihadism or is just choosing to ignore the facts. The difference is so stark and so simple. For instance, there are people who use their own children as human shields or worse, as bombs. Or there are people who kill their own daughters for the crime of getting raped because they know they have stained the family's honor. There are people who care more about violence done to a truly terrible book than about the destruction of whole societies. And at this point in human history, the overwhelming majority of people who are this confused about how to live good lives are Islamic extremists, and the worst of these are jihadists. Now, Hamas is a jihadist organization. In my view, that's really all we need to know about it. It would be like asking in 1941 how the SS became so radicalized and why so many millions of Germans support it. That's an interesting question now, right now, that Nazism has been defeated. In 1941, there was nothing to do but kill Nazis. I feel exactly the same way about jihadists. In fact, jihadists are worse than Nazis in some cases. They don't have the same power than the Nazis did in the 30s and 40s, which is obviously a very good thing, and we should try and keep it that way. But their ideology, the jihadist ideology, is actually worse. Jihadism is essentially Nazism plus an expectation of paradise. It's Nazism plus religious fanaticism. Nazism plus an eagerness to be martyred, to see their children martyred. There are many differences between Nazism and jihadism, of course. Nazism was a quasi-religious phenomenon. These people were not rationalists. It was basically racist mysticism anchored to a cult of personality. But the Nazis didn't use their own women and children as human shields. That would have been worse. How could you have made Auschwitz worse? Well, you could have given the guards a belief system that made them feel actual religious ecstasy as they herded innocent people into gas chambers. That would have been worse. And it would have been worse had these beliefs been central to the worldview of a majority of ordinary Germans and therefore difficult to separate from their other religious beliefs that gave their lives meaning. That would have been worse than what Nazism actually was or is. And that would have made it harder to purge from German society. So this conflict is between civilization and its enemies. Now, as for the loss of civilian life in Gaza, is absolutely horrific. Absolutely horrific. As I've said before, there is no argument that makes sense when you're watching the bodies of dead children pulled from the rubble. But as terrible as the destruction of Gaza is, Hamas is ultimately culpable for what happened there since October 7th. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. At that point, Gaza was getting more international aid than almost any place on earth. Hamas was using that aid to prepare for war. And then they started that war by butchering over 1,000 people and taking hundreds hostage. And Hamas could stop the destruction of Gaza at any time. They could not have started the war in the first place and could have used billions in international aid to create a peaceful society on the Mediterranean. But obviously, that was not a life project that interested them. They are, after all, jihadists. But at any point in the past 6 months, they could have returned the hostages and surrendered, or perhaps just returned the hostages and gotten safe passage to Qatar. And the loss of innocent life in Gaza would have been stopped. Ask yourself, as you listen to this, how is it that everyone has forgotten the hostages? How is it that Americans have forgotten, or perhaps never even knew, that there were American hostages among them? These are not prisoners of war. They're hostages. How is it all that the pressure and condemnation has been on Israel and not on Hamas? This is completely surreal. As I said before, apart from knowing that Israel really must destroy Hamas, I haven't known how they should go about doing that. That's a very complicated thing. Surely the strategy of bombing and occupying Gaza can be debated. But after October 7th, what can't be debated is whether Israel is justified in doing what it needs to do to destroy Hamas. And it does seem quite plausible that some significant invasion and destruction and occupation of Gaza was the only way to do that. There was probably a better way for the Allies in World War II to have defeated the Nazis. And if I had been alive then, I certainly hope I would have felt compassion for the non-combatants of Dresden and Hamburg and Cologne and Munich. But that way of waging war of worlds apart from what the IDF has done in Gaza. Let me say that again. But that way of waging war was worlds apart from what the IDF has done in Gaza. There's no comparison. But the reality was that Germany started that war, and that mattered. Germany produced the SS and produced the ultimate example of genocide, which to all other genocides are compared. And Hitler was extraordinarily popular among the Germans all the while. There was no clear line of demarcation between Nazis and ordinary Germans because so many millions of Germans fully supported the aims of the Third Reich. Well, the Palestinians have given us Hamas, an avowedly genocidal death cult, and Hamas remains quite popular in Gaza and the West Bank. This matters. There will be no peace in the Middle East until jihadism is destroyed. And given how much international pressure has been brought to bear on Israel, I'm not sure how likely that outcome is. Of course, Israel has made some terrible mistakes in Gaza, and the recent killing of aid workers is the latest example. But this kind of thing that happens in every war. There are always friendly fire incidents where the good guys wind up killing their own soldiers to say nothing of innocent non-combatants. Every conflict in the U.S. has been produced horrors of this kind. We bombed weddings and funerals in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, you have to remember Pat Tillman. We killed our own celebrity football player. Killing anyone but the bad guys amounts to an act of spectacular self-harm, especially for Israel, which has held up to greater scrutiny and to higher standards than any other nation under conditions that are objectively more challenging than any other nation has ever faced. Now, hopefully, Israel is busy learning whatever lessons it can learn to make fewer tragic mistakes. But none of its mistakes, however terrible, suggest that Israel is on the wrong side of this conflict or that they should stop fighting before destroying Hamas. They are fighting an urban war against a terrorist regime that is doing everything within their power to maximize the loss of civilian life on its own side. The length to which Hamas has gone to ensure civilian casualties is unprecedented. Again, on its own side. Really linger over that detail for a second. This gets my vote for the most perverse behavior in human history. No one else does this. No one else does this. Using your own people as human shields, relying on the fact that your enemy will care more about the lives of your own children than you do. How is it that so many people in the media and on podcasts, to say nothing of the activists and the college students and the TikTok zombies, can't see the asymmetry here? It is everything, and everything we care about only exists on one side of this divide. It really is safe to say that no army has ever faced the challenge that Israel is confronting in Gaza. Hundreds of miles of tunnels under hospitals and schools and mosques and homes built to shelter jihadists, not innocent men, women, or children. The innocent men, women, and children are meant to stay in place as human shields to protect the tunnels. This is totally diabolical and totally new. And there's a good reason to believe that IDF has done a better job in waging this war ethically than we have done in any of our past engagements that didn't present nearly the same challenges. I don't know if the war will end here. I just don't see how Israel can stop before they destroy Hezbollah in Lebanon. In fact, I don't see how this war stops until they or we topple the current regime in Iran. Even if Iran doesn't respond or responds in a way that's calibrated not to escalate things after October 7th, I just don't see how Israel can live with the current regime just whittling away on a nuclear weapon. It is the very definition of an existential threat. In any case, none of what I said just entails support for Netanyahu or for any hard right government in Israel, much less for the building of settlements in the West Bank. It's absolutely clear. It's absolutely clear that Israel needs to sideline its own religious fanatics, but to equate the fanatics of Israel with Hamas is to once again fail to understand the problem of jihadism. We have to recognize that there is no moral equivalence between Israel and her enemies. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll see you next time. These insights were brought to you by myself and the beautiful work of Sam Harris. Thank you. If you enjoyed that episode, please click here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But above all else, most importantly, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.